people. They must have every type. They must have one of the world's strongest people. They must have one of the world's fastest people because they got 1 billion people, right? What they don't have is that training infrastructure, right? So if you look at it that way, you're like, okay, hold on a second. We don't like performance-enhancing drugs because unearned, unfair advantage. Well, what else is training infrastructure than an unfair advantage? If you're born in the U.S., you have a way better chance of making it to the Olympics and becoming that greatest athlete in the world than someone in India. How is that fair? How is that not an unfair advantage? You know,
that's true. But to play devil's advocate, if you are a state-sponsored athlete from Russia or China, you have a much better advantage than you do if you're an American and you're some shot put dude who doesn't have a way to make a living. You pay your bills while you're working for the Olympics.
You totally do.
Yeah.
So my point is, there's no baseline human. Like there's no way to eliminate all advantages and never, you know, and just say, oh no, it's just what you were born with.
Right.
You know, it doesn't exist. There's no such thing.
Those women who are running with that, I'm sorry, what's her name again?
Caster Semenya.
Those women who are running with her, they just, shit happens, bro. You know, if you're a heavyweight boxer and you grow up in the era of Mike Tyson, I'm sorry, but this is just what you're stuck with.
Yeah.
This is what's going on, and some people are just, they just have advantages.
Yeah.
You know? They just have advantages physically, mentally, and there's outliers. You found it. Sorry, you got an outlier. Might want to do something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
absolutely.
Find out what races that lady's going to run and don't run those races.
Yeah, run a different race. That's always been my advice.
How do you feel about trans athletes?
You know, it's a good question. I think we're really going to go through like a cultural change on how we think about that, you know, and it's morphing so quickly, you know what I mean? I'm very much, because I am of this opinion that there is no such thing as like perfect fairness, and when we make those distinctions, we're always choosing who to allow. And because I think we should choose to allow like trans people to participate in society, I'm for an inclusive approach where, you know, we're able to like find like a model that allows those folks to compete fairly in a way that everybody's happy with. I think that's what we should do, you know. And that to me is like, that's what makes me like sports more, you know, is those comparisons. Like, you know, another thing that pissed me off so much was like, what's his name? The disabled runner who then killed his girlfriend.
Oh, yeah, the
Oscar Pistorius, right? And people were saying about this guy that his prosthetic gave him an advantage. Now, first of all, there's no fucking way that's true because he doesn't have muscles. Muscles convert food into.
It does give you an advantage. I mean,
you do think so?
Yeah, I think mechanically it does because they're springs. They essentially, the way his leg works with those things is you've seen him, right? They don't even look remotely like feet. You know what they look like, right?
I've seen them. Yeah, the cheetah
like,
things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a crazy like.
But dude,
seesaw type thing.
But hold on a second, that's not an advantage because how mechanics work, right? Is that a spring, you put energy into it and you get a little bit less energy out, right? So because that's the laws of thermodynamics, right? You can't get more out than you put in. Except a muscle does give you more than you put in because a muscle converts food into energy for a brief period, right? And so he has springs. He has springs. He doesn't have a machine in his leg the way the rest of us do that creates force out of food.
Well, the real question is whether or not the lower half of his legs, which is what he's missing, could make up for the advantage, the mechanical advantage of the shape of those things, which applies all sorts of really unusual leverage when you're running.
It's totally,
because you're not.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it's. I mean, I don't know if you took him with full legs and took him with those things, if they'd run the same amount of time. But
the thing is,
you can run fast as fuck with those things. You've seen those guys.
Well,
right?
he could, right? But where's all the other double amputees who are like, you know, coming and ruining?
How many of them are in track and field? How many of them are trying to compete?
I mean, the Paralympics is huge. There's like a ton of Paralympic athletes, you know, like
I've been told that it has a mechanical advantage by someone who actually should know what they're talking about, but I would like to look it up. Do those legs, Pistorius' legs,
I remember reading stuff at the time from, exercise, whatever, athletic scientists, I forget what it's called, who said that it didn't, right?
It didn't?
Yeah, but so that's a debate that we could have, right?
Right.
But the point that I was trying to make was, looking at that Olympics, God, that's a better event with that guy in it. You know, I'm so happy he was in it, right?
I see what you're saying. But if it does give you an advantage, and there's someone who comes in second place,
you know.
right.
Well, so the point is, when we make the rules of a game, right, and this is the point of our episode about games, which is about the Olympics, actually. When we make the rules of a game, there's no such thing as a perfectly fair competition that would be designed by God to be perfect and be perfectly fair, right? We're always making choices about what kind of competition we want to have and who we want to allow into it and what sort of outcome we want to have. You know what I mean?
Right.
Just like in baseball, too many home runs, move the mound up or down. You know how they change the rules a little bit because they want more home runs? Same thing with track and field. We change the rules a little bit to allow this person and not allow this person, right? I think that when we're talking about people, we should always try to include more people, not less. We should, if you're a double amputee and you can get your way into the Olympics and you can make a plausible case, I think we should try to entertain that notion and we should try to find a way to get that guy in there, right? As far as trans athletes go, we could sit here and talk for 3 hours about like all the different ways that hormones might affect your body and might not affect your body, and I'm not an expert on that, and I don't want to claim to be, right? But a sports with trans athletes who are competing with with their gender, right? That is a sporting world that I'm more interested in, right? And I think we should find a way to make that happen. I know it's going to be really complicated and messy, right? And there's going to be a lot of debate about it, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and there's going to be a lot of arguments. But I hope that that's the world that we move forward to. That's my point of view.
My point of view is that there's a distinction. There's a reason why we make the distinction to have male athletics versus female athletics. The reason is that males have a physiological advantage over women. So in most sports, most physical sports, we do not have males compete with females. The question becomes when someone who is male transitions and becomes female, do those same physiological advantages apply? And what is the evidence? Well, the evidence in competition seems to be that it shows that it does apply, particularly in weightlifting, rugby, mountain biking, power heavy sports that favor larger people, stronger bodies. Males that transition to females have a significant advantage in their breaking world records. So if you're a woman and you're a natural woman and you don't take any extra hormones or male hormones, you're not taking steroids or any sort of performance-enhancing drugs, you're doing your very best to compete and you're at the top of the heap. But then someone comes along that was a man for 30 years and decides that they're going to be a woman, and this has happened, and literally transitioned a few months ago, and competes as a woman and destroys records and dominates you in that sport. That's bullshit. And that's not competing on a level playing field. That's a person who's biologically a male and who is a male for 30 plus years of having testosterone run through their body and affect their tendon strength and affect the shape of their bones and the mechanical advantages of the male hips versus the female hips. And then they're competing with smaller people who have been a woman their whole life. It's not fair. It's as much cheating as taking steroids when the other person doesn't, or taking performance-enhancing drugs when the other person doesn't. Maybe even more so. Maybe even more so because you also have there's a bunch of advantages in terms of reaction time that males enjoy. It's some significant difference in reaction time between males and even untrained males versus female professional athletes.
Well, I disagree, and
what do you disagree about?
I've already my main point being the one that I already made, right? That I don't think that there is such a thing as a perfectly level playing field. I think we decide what kind of playing field we want to have.
Sure, but we do make the distinction where we don't allow men to compete in women's divisions. And
I think that distinction may be breaking down a bit, right? And I think it may be time to break down that distinction a little bit.
So you think that males should be able to compete in the women's division of weightlifting?
No, I don't necessarily.
But they can if they transition.
Well, first of all, there's a lot of stuff to break down, right? And I'm not an expert on the subject, right? So it's just sort of off the top of my head. One thing is, you're postulating a particular person who decided to transition at the age of 30, right? Mm-hmm. And they were very big and strong before, right? And they decided to transition. Now, that is a type of person that exists, right? I think over the next, certainly 30 years, we're going to see, now that people are starting to understand that being trans is just a way that people are, right? They're just people who are trans, you know, and this is something that we're going to accept and support, right? You're seeing folks transition much earlier age, you know. And so if someone is you know transitioning from the age of like 7 years old, right, you know working with those hormones, you know, from that age, right, they're not going to have their body situation is going to be very different than the one that you postulated, right? I also know from my trans friends that the effects that the hormones have on your body are like really profound, you know, like really profound. Like we're not to a surprising degree, right? And so, you know, I have, look, if the question is how does a person who starts taking hormones at a particular age, right, how does their body change and how does that affect vis-a-vis athletic performance? I don't know. We're in such new territory here, right?
Yeah, well, we certainly are, and we just scratched upon the idea of kids transitioning at a very early age. I mean, there's been more scientific evidence that points that if kids don't do that, then when they wanted to be trans at an early age, they just become gay men, and that there's nothing wrong with that either. There's no reason to give kids hormones, and there's no reason to decide before a person's frontal lobe is completely fully developed, which doesn't even take place till like 25. People don't know who they are. A 7-year-old, people don't even give their 7-year-old phones. You don't let them vote. You're going to let them decide what sex they're going to be for the rest of their life?
The research that I've seen, and again, I'm not an expert on this, and you know, I'd love to. This is a conversation. This is something I'd love to talk about on our show, and I'd specifically love, you know, this is the kind of topic where I really want to make sure that I know the research and that I'm, you know, also speaking to trans folks, you know, in this conversation. But so to touch on just what I've, you know, my own experience and the research I've seen. The research I've seen is that trans kids from a young age, they are incredibly consistent in when they're expressing their gender identity.
Okay, but that's a big generalization. You're talking about a lot of human beings.
Yeah, but
that's fits this narrative by saying they're incredibly consistent. But like, if you polled these people, like, what are you talking about? Like, if you,
I mean, that's I don't have the research in front of me that I saw, so I can't like go into the details on it. But like, yeah, it was research that was surveying and tracking like trans kids who declared their identity from a young age. Did it change? The answer was generally no, it really didn't. You know, I have a friend who has a trans kid. Don't know the kid's exact age, but you know, we're in the age range that we're talking about. And you know, he's explained that like, well, you know, my child from a very young age consistently like said, I am a girl, like, and has never contradicted themselves, never changed their mind. And so the humane thing and the thing that he felt was good to do as a parent was to like embrace that choice on his child's part, right? And yeah, that's
embrace that choice, meaning hormonally.
I shouldn't even phrase it as a choice, like embrace that identity.
But it is a choice, right? I mean, if you're choosing to add hormones to a child's body, that's a choice.
It's a choice it's a choice on the part of the parent. It's not a choice on the part of the child to like in the same way that being gay isn't a choice. Yeah.
Okay, but if that's who they are, if they think that they're a girl, why do you have to give them hormones to make them more of a girl?
Because I'm sorry. Can you expand on the question?
It's a simple question. If you say that the child thinks it's a girl, so you're going to give the child hormones. Mm-hmm. If the child thinks it's a girl, let it be a girl. Like, you don't have. Why are you adding hormones? If you're shooting hormones into a child and you're affecting the child's development, you're saying that's not a choice. That's nonsense. Of course it's a choice. You're choosing to chemically change this child's body. You're choosing to inject things into this child's body on a regular basis that are going to radically affect the physical development of their body.
Yeah.
And you're saying that this isn't a choice. Well, it's definitely a choice to do that.
So what trans people express, and again, I'm not an expert. This is from me talking to my trans friends and you know, seeing what other trans folks say, is that the experience of being trans and not receiving hormones, right, and not having the body that you identify with, the feeling of dysphoria, right, is extremely like painful and is a condition unto itself, right? The feeling of not belonging with the body that you have, of that mismatch, right? That seems to be in the broad variety of humanity, the way that some people are born, right? Where their inner self, right, the self that they are, they're like, I am a, you know, they're not thinking they are a woman. They're like, this is the person that I am. Doesn't match the body that they have, right? And that gives them extreme distress, right? And that leads to, you know, suicide. That leads to